hours. It's like you're 1:30 instead of.
You're like-
So this is the Senate and House conference on the T-bill. And we're about to start, and my hope is that we can go through the stuff that's non-controversial and say, yep, that, and anything that there's any controversy at all on, we'll begin to work on those in our next meeting. But why don't you lead us through which sheet is this sheet?
Yeah, the one that's identified the sections that are the same already. That's the one we should all work off of.
Okay.
Otherwise we'll be here all morning. So section 1A in the Senate.
This is the same.
Oh, that's
good. But just give you.
That's yours. No,
We already have our.
yeah, that's yours. That's yours.
All right, and there's the version we're working off of
I
today.
have notes there. This should be the same set. That you're using.
All right, everybody ready?
Yes.
All right, section 1A in the Senate. This is the summary of transportation investments intended to reduce transportation related greenhouse gas emissions, reduce fossil fuel use, and save Vermont households money. Summarizes provisions in the transportation program. It doesn't have any substantive impact.
We call this the Tim Ash stuff because this was the, we wanted it circled out years ago now. Are we okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
We've had numerous bills that included this.
All right, that gets us through 3 pages. The next difference here, the Senate had the 1.15 million in pilot for town highway non-federal disasters in lieu of 1.15 million in T funds. And I understand that this is probably dependent on the big bill at this point. And so,
It's in the big bill.
And we
They agree to it.
and they just agreed to it
Okay.
from the House side. So we're ready to go with this if this meet, unless you have questions.
Do we want to wait until sort of what you did with the money we go through and check out?
We can wait on this, if you have any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I mean, I think we're fine with it. It's just, you know, what happens if, you know, the money doesn't get expended to, exposed areas, that you put this money towards. So I guess it is
Okay.
we're fine with it, but I think, yeah.
We'll hold this until we have a further discussion on where the money is spent, but the gap here, about $500,000 of this is just going down to 5. Whatever hole we have in the T fund, and regardless of whatever version you are in your T fund, there's a hole. So we can use the money. Number 3.
this is the requirement that there be an unobligated T fund balance of $686,000 going into fiscal year 26. This amount was to compensate for revenue reductions in S46 and S123. S46 has not moved in the House, and S123 has taken out the biggest portion of that. So I think we're down, I forget what the exact amount is, Logan, but we're down under 50,000 in revenue reductions at this point.
Except
With
15 or
and I don't remember if there's something else there.
29 for the GV exemptions for municipal and state.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
44,000 if it stays the way it is today.
yeah.
I guess needless to say, that probably has to stay open until those other areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. 4 is state and federal funding updates from the Secretary of Transportation. to the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee in September and December, and more frequently if necessitated by a significant reduction in revenue.
And our thinking was that as much money has been held by the feds to this point, that we need to have some feedback from what's going on. And this was our attempt to try to get at that. What's not specifically mentioned here, and I have a slight bit of concern, and we don't have to do this here, is we think we're going to get the 3 million to do the and we keep hearing from the administration that it's looking good,
Yeah.
but nobody said yes yet.
Yeah.
So would we want to recognize someplace here that if that didn't happen, that we would want some feedback?
Definitely some feedback and some direction of where they would go to get that money. Yeah. Well, yeah.
We're in the same. I don't know about the comfortable chairs, you're too tall and your legs don't fit under the chair.
You have the metal thing on the side,
Work on
and you
that.
go up and down.
You know, it's too fancy.
So,
Much better.
so we could approve this but that piece, hopefully, we keep thinking that we'll find out about that 3 million, and we can't really move ahead now without it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put some language about that here.
I'm just suggesting someplace, but it's one of those things that fits into the thinking of the feds holding money.
It is actually already in the bill later.
Yeah.
We have a funding update for the MBUP program specifically.
Okay.
So, same dates actually as this. So,
And we should probably make sure that we tie that to this.
yeah, so they could be combined together. Right now it's down with the MBUP sections. And I forget exactly what section that is, but I can point it out. 20.
We should,
Yeah.
they probably shouldn't be tied together.
Okay.
A briefing, 2 briefings, September 30th, December 15th, right?
Yeah,
Where are we at with the money and where are we at with every piece of it and whatnot? And
yep.
that's, if you already heard from the agency, we haven't, we didn't ask them for it, so we didn't get it from them, but unless there's some concern on their part that we're not aware of.
Yeah, I think we came to agree with them.
Well, I think generally what you'll see in this section and a few others is the Senate's attempt to try to get more information from the Agency of Transportation so that we can make proactive decisions. I think while and we'll talk about more, but the 10G report is kind of acted in some ways as that detail driven, when have things changed and we needed more information that isn't just shown in the budget. So I think this is our attempt to try to get a handle as a legislative body on what we can expect with federal funding changes. And it is an ask of time and staff work by the agency, but I think it's what we heard was it's reasonably critical for us to get proactive information where we can so that we can inform our constituents and also our colleagues when there are major changes that will be coming.
And the JTAC, whose turn is it to call on a meeting if they want to call?
I don't know.
Do we take turns?
That's a rumor I
I think
heard.
they alternate.
We do.
A rumor that I heard.
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious.
I don't know if that's how often they changed. It was the House last year. I don't know if it's how many years that.
Yeah, I think you alternate each year or each biennium.
It's the trouble of being a rookie, it's just easier to ask the questions than.
Well,
You know,
I helped create the JTAC committee,
So-
but that was years ago now, so I've
according,
lost track.
according to the JFO website, Senator Westman is the current chair of the JTAC committee. So
Yeah.
congratulations, Senator. And 3 members of the committee are in the room here, so.
Well, but I would think at this point, what this does is it sets up a process where with as much uncertainty as there is.
Important.
Well, why don't we see if we can hide the other language and.
Okay. Otherwise, in principle, we're certain.
Yep.
All right. Sections 5 and 6, this is the creation of the dashboard and the repeal of the existing 10G reports.
I would say leave that open. Yeah, a little bit of concern about.
The Tim Horton. Thank you.
Okay,
Can I ask if the concern is the dashboard or the loss of the 10G reports?
I mean, you can do the dashboard, but I'm against eliminating the 10G. That's something that our side looks at quite frequently and we find value in it. But just to get rid of it, that would be say a non-starter.
That's really helpful information. I think what we heard on our side was that we haven't been able to utilize the 10G reports as effectively as the House has, but to ask the agency to do both the 10G reports and create a dashboard was going to be more work than potentially was reasonable to ask for. So I think our hope with that was to try to get the dashboard, which provides more information, and even we got some examples that other states have where you can really track project by project in a way that you can't necessarily do the 10G report. So if you were asking my personal opinion, I would say that I also have found value in the 10G reports, but I think the dashboard would be even more useful potentially.
I mean, you could do both. Like I said, I'll remind you is and you probably are aware that we just did this last year. We Tim or the auditor came out with recommendations and we looked at that report and made changes to that. So and that was just last year.
I guess I would add that being in the House and the House members are probably closer tied to their districts and probably a little closer tied to each individual project. And since we meet in the morning and the afternoon, we perhaps are a little more granular and we feel that perhaps there's 2 different values there, and that would be hard for us to, after the kind of time spent last year, to just give up on that after all those adjustments after 1 year. And I think we are more project, perhaps, and district oriented a little bit since we have more time and members that are more directly involved in one community and not perhaps dozens.
I think we hear you, we'll hold it open for now, that we do here.
Okay.
All right, the next area where there's a difference is section 6 in the House, 10 in the Senate. This is the use of rail trails. There were 2 technical corrections in the Senate version in V8 and V9. And then the Senate version utilized a cross-reference back to the existing $300 civil penalty, as opposed to the House version, which cited a civil penalty or noted a civil penalty of not more than $300. I think the intent here was to clarify that it was just 1 penalty in the Senate version, and I think the House's intent was that it be just 1 penalty. And so I think you're actually on the same page here. And that the Senate version can be seen as technical corrections.
We're good.
Fine, yeah.
Okay. We're good.
Okay, the Green Mountain Transit Authority. Again, I think this is more in the nature of technical corrections and clarification, based on further feedback from Green Mountain Transit, that led to the differences in the Senate version. As I mentioned to the House members yesterday, Green Mountain Transit requested the changes so that it aligns with their federal funding stream, and then additional service outside the urbanized area with approval of the Agency of Transportation, which would align them with the state plan there, and then the clarification that changes to their charter don't affect the ability for other transit agencies to provide service to the urbanized area of Chittenden County with approval of the agency.
Yeah.
I think that was a benefit of more time on our side.
Section 15, this is a new report back in the Senate version on the cancellation of locally managed projects and the recovery of grant funds for those projects. This was discussed in the House. There was not resolution between the agency and the league and regional planners, and the Senate has proposed that they work with a consultant to review the requirements of the statute and come up with recommendations.
We took quite a bit of testimony on this in terms of where the spot was, and for the few amount of times that it's occurred over the, at least that's what I understood from it happening so rarely, that we kind of left it there. This seems like sort of an awful lot of that need of a consultant and an effort to solve something that the two groups work so closely together all the way through the grant process, through the effort to get a project to the level that they do, that they, it seems like there's an awful lot more ask and effort than what the amount of issues that are actually being addressed. And they are, to some degree, the feeling was, we'd like to see them, I guess, work it out if they can. I guess we could come back and revisit the idea that we need to spend money on a consultant and an effort, but the so amount of time. I think we had heard that there were single digits of issues in the 20+ years of experience that were in the room at the time, and the league and players both agreed that it was rare, not that they didn't have their pieces. So anyway, I'm not just throwing out that whether or not consultant money sounds like more money in time than what we would have thought that there was an issue there, but we're a flexible group. And I haven't heard any additional testimony on this one in a couple of months, so I'm not sure anybody else wants to add to it, but a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill is what our committee heard in their testimony.
So the push here, you're not opposed to, it's really, should we be hiring a consultant? Okay.
Right.
We should have
There's probably clarification needed,
Arguing
but
over.
does it really is it that deep? And maybe there is, and maybe we missed something piece on that, but is it really that, is there that much there?
Okay.
And certainly, we're always in favor of clarification for our staff.
Okay.
So 16 is the review of current municipal practices for planning, maintenance, and upgrades to transportation assets, developing a framework for a system to assess the current condition of municipal transport networks, and then developing a prioritization process for directing state funding to repair and maintenance of municipal assets, along with potential statutory changes. This is a 2-year report back with AOT in consultation with the league and planners, and a consultant providing assistance through the process.
Well, no, I guess conceptually we agree with it, but I think from our side is when we look what's at the state level and the amount of resources and departments that they have to sort of implement this prioritization, how does that translate to the towns? Are we, creating like a department within town government now so they can create, their prioritization? I just like, are we creating like bigger government in this sense? So conceptually we agree with you, but like what's
Nice.
like,
It's like a benefit to the town.
yeah.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you
Yeah.
think what we're trying to do here. And
What we're trying to get at in the information is if I and I will use the state as an example. If we don't fund, we automatically say, if we don't fund, you're going to have this many poor and very poor roads in this period of time. We basically have nothing that ties the funding for towns to what the need really is out there. And how do we assess what's happening with the roads in town? We do for bridges that's above 20 feet, but we don't for anything else. So how do I, for those of us that would like to make a case for municipalities based upon need, what do we have for information? And shouldn't we at least attempt to try to move to a place where we get information that's better?
So this wouldn't just be saying to towns, your roads are a mess, you need to fix them. It would be like, your roads are a mess and we'd like to help you.
Well, the thought is eventually, maybe we should be looking at what are we trying to help the towns fund and do. I would also say there are, when we talk about Class 2 roadway and the structures programs, and we make towns wait for 3 years to get money, and I'll use Montpelier as an example. From Route 2, if Route 2 closes to the roundabout headed to Barry through, if that closes, everybody comes on Town Hill Road through Montpelier. And I'm going to speak personally for myself. I look at that and say, why should communities that have those roads that have a significant importance within a region have to wait 3 to 5 years to get a structures grant or that? And so in the whole looking of what is important for towns, and that we got to
echo what Chair Westman is saying, I think collectively, both transportation committees have identified that municipalities are struggling. They're not getting the resources they need, and in fact are some of the worst quality roads that we have anecdotally. But that's anecdotal, and unfortunately, our towns don't have the capacity to create and produce the level of work that is needed that the state does to show the value why we're giving them money. So our hope here is to start a process to get the data that we need to be able to articulate what is the need that towns have, what are municipalities facing, rather than, I think we've kind of, as you've done in your own bill, increase the amount. Because we do know we need to increase it, but we want to make sure we're doing it in an effective way and data-driven.
And I'd say we applaud you adding money to increase it.
Yeah.
But when the agency will say that the cost of their construction projects went up 40% between 2021 and 2023, we have nothing to base. If towns face the same 40% increase, we have nothing to say.
Yeah, we can't throw, like I said, not to speak for everybody, but we totally agree with the concept. It's like, how do we get from the state to the town without creating this same things that they have in place, as far as with apartments. We all know is the things and the tools and the money that they have totally for it, but it's just like, can that happen? I don't know. But maybe that's maybe no.
We're open
Yeah.
any suggestion. This is a thing to start the push to see if we can't collect more information.
Yeah.
So we I can be honest, the goal I think we have is sometime in the future, we start basing the way we run these formulas based upon need from the town.
I'm on favor of doing whatever we can. Right now, my town is really struggling financially, and they have been asking for some revenue sharing because of the situation with the motels. But so this might help to alleviate that.
Well, when have small towns that are under 1,000 people and 80% of their budget is, on the municipal side is roads.
Yeah.
And I can't begin to tell you what their need is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And levels, class 1, 2, 3, what are we're gonna expect that to be part of what they're doing? We're headed towards some level of prioritization is what we're trying to, you're envisioning in effect a huge, white book for the entire state.
Some states have very detailed local road programs where they do prioritize projects for all roads. And we do have it, and we also have regional government. So typically a regional government would also play a role here. So I think it's less about class of the roads, like 1, 2, 3, or 4, and more, as the chair said, poor, fair, good, kind of what we have now. And it's not asking the towns to do that in this language, is my understanding. It's asking AOT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and I think one other,
The planners.
to actually come up with what could that look like. And I guess my intent would be to have it be less on the towns and more on state government to be able to facilitate that data collection.
When they talked about this, just to walk a little bit more, the technology, you said that, we've said that, bridges over 20 feet, and we're pretty good at that. We know where the problems are and whatnot. Is the technology with where we're headed with drones and roads and the sensors and whatnot, this ought to get a lot easier.
I would hope so.
And I was curious if anybody talked about that in any of your testimony.
We didn't talk about that specifically, but I would tend to agree with that. But there still has to be some place that if the towns have information, in a lot of respects, I think, well, none of us, some towns are really good at collecting this information now. Some towns aren't, but we have no central place where anything gets collected. So how do we, and I think you're right with drones and all of that sort of stuff. I can't tell you how many large culverts. I know when I hit a small town, I know one small town that I represent had an $800,000 culvert this year, and it's a town of under 700 people. That was a big deal. So
I guess the last part of it is that trying to make sure dollars are on the road and the work and not in another department of planning and pieces and bureaucracy and chasing versus how much is going out. So
I think we're
on the same
the same
concept.
page.
Somewhere technology ought to make some of these things less expensive to do and faster. And I'm not sure where that fits in. So I would say that overall, we think that especially on the town portion of those major routes that you're talking about and the shortcuts that everybody uses because of the problems with the state highway, we should recognize some of that. The Route 7s through certain parts of towns, or the Route 78s through towns, or the Route 9s are critical to the state more than they are to that particular town. That's a pass through. So anyway, I guess to sum it up, we like the direction. We're concerned about what we're going to do with it as we go. So
I think we're totally open to any changes in this for next year and the year after as we start to collect them. The push would be, can't we get some better information so we can base what we do for towns based upon what their need is.
Yeah, so this does sound cumbersome, and like I said, if you can get it, is there, how much is this gonna cost, this study? Is there, did you get that, or do we need to set money aside? Usually these things don't come cheap.
Well, and we didn't really talk about the overall cost of this.
But it just maybe we can get AOT or whatever to
Yep.
come on it. I know they do have a fund that they do studies, but might exceed their a lot. Or I might not.
Really,
Yeah.
All right. And 17.
All right. So 17, this is another AOT in consultation with the league and the planners, engaging a consultant to look at finding efficiencies and improvements in the state town highway aid and municipal grant programs. Yeah,
Going to
those.
you know, it's all in the same.
Yes.
And do we have money for that?
So after that, we get to the mileage-based user fee, where very confusingly in section 11 of the House and 18 of the Senate, we are revising sections 27 through 29 of the 2023 T-bill. So I'm not gonna cite sections here. The key takeaways, you can see in yellow here where the Senate made changes to the House language. The big one is that the House had a projected implementation date of July 1, 2026. The Senate had a projected implementation date of on or before January 1, 2027. The other changes are the House used the phrase gas tax, the Senate used the phrase fuel tax to reflect both diesel and gas tax. The Senate added clarification that mileage-based user fee would not be collected until the General Assembly had enacted legislation that both establishes the amount of the fee and codifies any necessary authorization language, and that legislation becomes effective. And then turning the page, the next two pages, you're just seeing the date differences again. And then finally turning the page one more time to section 12 of the House and 19 of the Senate. There are a couple key differences here. The first set of differences are in the intent relating to where the mileage-based user fee proposal should be set at. The House's proposal is that it be approximately equivalent to the amount collected by the state and the federal government in gas tax revenue for internal combustion engines, and approximately equivalent to state and federal gas tax revenue and EV infrastructure fee for plug-in hybrids. The Senate version is that it be approximately equivalent to the average amount collected by just the state in fuel tax revenues or fuel tax and EV infrastructure fees. And the Senate also added intent language that the mileage-based user fee will be an interim step towards gradually expanding the mileage-based user fee to all motor vehicles. So multiple differences between the two sides there.
I'm in favor of that extending, putting in language, extending to all motor vehicles. That's a good development.
To extending, what was that?
Extending the, not just doing it for, extending it to expanding the mileage-based user fee, the intent to expand the mileage-based user fee to all motor vehicles.
Subsection 2, so we're talking about. You're all,
Oh,
I would say to you for the day, we put, they can do it before July 1st of January 1st or January 1st before we can say. We're very well aware that they were supposed to be working on that now, but the grant's held up. And we don't want to come back here in January and know that we can't do it July 1st. So we're scrambling and people are going to have to be notified about all of this. So we wanted to create a date that didn't make anybody scramble. But if they wanted to, if they could get it all together by July 1st, they could do it before. So we wanted to do a safe drop dead date and not have us come back here and allow the agency to move around that.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully that grant will come.
Yeah, and I think from our standpoint is the sooner the better, I mean, because we're constantly talking about $2 to $3 million in lost revenue. I mean, I think the registration brings in, less than $1 million. When this is fully implemented for the full year, the envelope is like 7 million. So you try to extrapolate that, it's probably a couple of million. So
We were trying to balance both
Yeah,
in that.
The longer this goes, the less the money's for transportation. The registration fees doesn't help transportation at all.
But
Well, there has to be practical.
if it had the 3 million in hand, we probably wouldn't suggest. I think if you don't mind, the agency wanted to weigh in.
For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. I just had a piece of technical information that might help inform your discussions that hadn't been available up until yesterday. So the federal reconciliation of the budget bill has been being worked on in House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And there's been a lot of talk over the past week about about the creation of a new federal fee on electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. And it looks like yesterday they settled on a fee of $250 for all electric vehicles and $100 for plug-in hybrids as a federal fee. And that funding up to $2 million would be provided to each state to create a collection process for collecting that fee. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at and talking with Federal Highway about is that we might be able to implement our collection process in a manner using that $2 million, which could aid in future collection of the MBUF fee for the state piece of this. So there's just a little opening of sort of other possibilities arising as we look at this and the federal fee related to the House version of the language.
Is the fee from the federal government, is that on new cars or is it on
All electric vehicles.
all electric vehicles, like
Annually.
annual registration fee?
It's
It's not a regular.
essentially an EV infrastructure fee from the federal government, and it goes to the federal highway fund.
So, anyways, so our date is based on let them go as quick as they can do it, but we don't want to be back there next year scrambling to make sure that, because we're still waiting for that money. Okay,
We all begrudgingly have to accept they're not gonna get it done in the time frame they want. Yes, it's-
I think that might be.
It's not really that, it's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, I don't think we can make it happen any faster.
well, we like it.
Am I hearing that the House will accept the Senate changes on 18?
I think that you're saying the date,
Yeah, just the date.
Okay,
But what about the, there's no.
and there's this whole issue with the federal versus the state. Oh, that's 19, okay. We're in 8.
Well, we had that language was there too. Hate to
That was
argue with other
Yeah,
top reads, but I think it might be premature to assign all vehicles for miles based.
It should
Where
be
was that?
10.
Yeah, I know.
But that's section 9. That's on 9.
Oh, that's not, all right, so we're.
That's actually-
yeah, it's just the-
that was 8.
Yeah.
Stuff in 18, yeah, we're gonna cover 19 here. in a
All
second.
right, so,
yeah, so that's.
We were recognizing in 18 minutes, you know.
yeah.
On the first page of 18, the only other differences besides the date are in 3 and 4.
Fuel or gas.
Fuel or gas, and then kilowatt hours or electricity, work toward versus examine. And then specifying out of state plug-in electric vehicles traveling in Vermont, recognizing that you can't capture those with a mileage-based fee. And then the additional clarity on when the mileage-based user fee would be collected. So,
You heard some members pretty strong feeling about their mileage-based user fee when they take their electric car on vacation. They drive significant miles, but they're not on Vermont roads. And they come back and now they're paying a huge fee or something that they didn't, do. My also understanding is if we don't start somewhere and learn how to work those bugs out, we're not gonna get anywhere. So I don't know. That's a tough one. Some of our members are really concerned about what they, I guess everybody uses different terms. Their particular term is fair. Whether that's fair or not.
Well, that's why we wanted 4 so that we'd see it, what it is before we create the end.
So in the section 18 overall, I think we're pretty close on 18 and all. Well, and pretty close to put the check mark on this. So even though nobody's happy in general, where we're exactly at.
Well, we wanted to do this before and, but, so are we okay with 18 and then 19's on hold?
That would be my,
Yeah, yeah.
that would be my perspective.
Yeah.
18 is. We're probably set for 18, we're moving into 19.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay with 18.
Okay, so 19. All right, this is where, again, there's a difference, in the phrasing for the amount collected. So House is approximately equivalent to the amount collected by state and federal and gas tax. Senate is approximately equivalent to the average amount collected by the state and fuel tax revenues. And then the other piece is that this is an interim step towards expanding the MBUT to all motor vehicles. So there's really two pieces here. First is the phrasing around where to set the fee, and the second is the intent language regarding coverage.
I think that Representative Couch was concerned about the word coverage.
I'm happy to address that. So these two pieces were things that I highlighted that we needed to update because I had concern that I raised in committee around the original intent being equivalent to the amount collected by the state and federal government tapping gas tax revenue. I read that as originally we want to make up the difference of what we lost in the gas tax versus what is the average amount that someone would be paying as a driver. Which I think if we're going to set that we need to raise revenue to meet a loss of revenue, that's not that's not how I think we should personally do that. And then because it had federal and state, my concern was, okay, then we have a very big gap that we're going to be asking to raise the amount of money on a fee for EV drivers to meet the gap to fill it versus my hope with the language here is that it's more, what is the average vehicle, not the gap that we're trying to fill. And then for the second part, I have concerns in general that we are going to try to meet our gas tax revenue declines by charging electric vehicle drivers, but not transitioning the MBUF program to all drivers in a reasonable amount of time. So I did just want to make sure that we had that explained, that this is an interim step, not EV drivers will be now targeted to make up the lost revenue, which I think could be an easy move for maybe a less climate friendly legislator.
Sure. I mean, I just think we're getting the cart before the horse. As far as saying that we're expanding it to all motor vehicles. And I don't think anybody, or at least I'm not convinced that there is not going to be a gas powered vehicles in the future. There's always going to be that. And to say that they're going to be on the hook for miles based when there's still a gas tax out there. I just think I know it's an end, but I don't think that's the message we should be saying now. So little too early to have that message out there now that this is the way it's going to be. Our goal is going to be.
I do think the agency of transportation has been clear that ultimately their goal would be to completely transition us to an NBUF model for all
You wouldn't have
vehicles.
two taxes.
Yeah.
Those taxes.
So you get rid of the gas.
So
Then we could cross that bridge. It's just a mixed message out there now to people when they read it. Like, how are we going to get
There
double?
are different parts to it, that right, we're saying it starts at 19. So on the intent part, if we're doing that one, the second part, we're right now. Reading this in the last X number of days and looking at this, I really had a lot of concern about the idea that is mileage based what we're after and versus how do you balance the climate action piece of emissions and impact on the environment versus the personal freedom of being able to drive wherever you want and to go wherever you want? Are we really trying to limit economic activity by controlling the number of miles that somebody does or doesn't go as an impact to their cost? What we really want is them to drive incredibly efficient vehicles, whether they be electric or gas. And the development of most new technologies allows for a lighter and usually more efficient vehicle, no matter what it is. And when you record people's mileage, you're asking them to limit the amount of movement and activity if they feel they need to reduce the cost. And what I would prefer, as far as a mindset, is that I'm not trying to limit people's freedom and activity. I'm trying to make sure that we emit less into the environment and that we use the most efficient piece possible. And whether that gas vehicle gets to 100 miles per gallon someday, or an electric vehicle perhaps finds a battery that isn't nearly as heavy and can not continue to do any level of emissions, because the impact on the road is even an entirely different thing. So philosophically, really hitting this thing over the last X number of days since we've seen it, I am fundamentally opposed to anything that limits an economic activity or a freedom of a Vermonter to go and explore wherever they want. Well, I'm totally on board with reducing the amount of impact on the environment. I don't think this statement or this concept of mileage-based is something that I'm ready to accept at this point. I think there's got to be a way to really zero into efficiencies and emissions and protecting the environment. If somebody wants to drive 10,000 miles, they can do it without emitting, and we can still find a way to help build the road. They want to drive 100,000 miles. If they can do it without a way that impacts the roads and doesn't hurt the environment, we should be able to find a way to do that and not limit their activity, but we should be able to be more efficient and more environmentally friendly without hurting a goal that could potentially hurt someone's economic activity in life.
I agree. And that's actually why I'm not in favor of any fees on EVs at this point, because they are the most efficient zero emissions vehicles. And we are limiting the mobility of EV drivers by putting a fee potentially on them that relates to the mileage they've used. But I think we've kind of come to a compromise where as gas tax revenue continues to decline, and it's not just EVs, they're the smallest percentage of actually who's the decline. It's our high efficiency pickup drivers who are darn it taken away from the gas tax. I think that this is a direction that we're going to need to move in general to be able to afford our roads and bridges.
Somewhere the libertarian in me is just bothered by an activity that limits where I can go.
I agree.
Why does it limit to where you can go?
Well, the economic aspect of even if I'm not impacting the road or the environment, but I put miles on my vehicle, that's going to cost me.
Because it's out of state.
Or because it's off-road, or because it's on my property, or because it's incredibly efficient, so I can go an awfully long ways without impacting the environment, but I am going to have X amount of pennies per mile when I'm not impacting the road or the environment. The technology.
If you impact the road, I guess unless you're off just on your own track behind your house.
So, and then of course, the impact of the roads are vary greatly by the weight of the vehicle. Then,
Well, with that, if you want to put a proposal that bases the fee on weight and use of the road, I'd be really excited.
then that'll open up a whole level of can of worms. So,
we could get back to.
since it's intent, I guess.
All right, we're gonna leave this one open.
I think where
Because it's
because
intent,
it is time,
I'm
if I hope
philosophical about it.
is,
Just because it's intent language on
Yeah,
the
I
Right.
know no fees on EVs.
I have to pay
my-
for the roads.
my hope would be that we could get through the 7 or 8 pages.
All right.
that we've got.
I won't do that again.
But no, I enjoy it.
Section-
$260 isn't great.
Well, that changes the part of part A.
Yeah.
Because in
20.
part A, the intention of the people of the
Right.
committee was, well, they're not paying anything in the related to federal. So if you're driving a gas vehicle, you're paying quite a bit more.
Section
that's what
20,
we're
I
driving on.
think if we can incorporate 20 with
Yeah,
section 4. There's general agreement, so if you could put something, we'll run by that quickly.
Right, so I've got that noted to combine it with 4,
22,
22, 22, 23, 24, and 25 relate to incorporating the idea of reducing vehicle miles traveled into various aspects. So 22 adds it to the definitions from Title 19. 23 adds it to the mission statement for the Agency of Transportation. The need for projects that will, among other things, reduce vehicle miles traveled within the state when feasible. Section 24 relates to considering reductions in vehicle miles traveled or greenhouse gas emissions when choosing between improvement of an existing highway and complete reconstruction. And that is among a number of other factors. It's one of 11 factors to be considered. And then 25 provides that in the transportation program, it be developed in a fiscally responsible manner to accomplish the following objectives, including striving to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions.
This section came from S75, which is our Hertz bill on our side. We did ultimately change the language to reflect some recommendations from the agency, specifically in 25.5, we added striving rather than just to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We're striving to reduce vehicles miles traveled.
You love that.
I accept it. I accept we'll strive, not do it.
They have a little bit of curtains there.
Yeah.
I think in general, the concept is.
Okay,
Is
okay.
Okay,
for all this, like number 25, you said specific.
Well, they all.
23, 24.
Yeah.
And the definition in section 22, I think you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are all okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, that brings us to the 5 sections on demand response transportation. So first section is $600,000 in one-time funds from the transportation fund to provide grants to hire coordinators to recruit and retain additional volunteer drivers for these programs. The second piece is the report back from DEVA regarding the Medicaid non-emergency transportation program. The third piece is a report looking at whether there are ways to resolve some of the problems with the background checks required for the Medicaid non-emergency transportation program. The section 29 is publicity and outreach through the DMV regarding the Medicaid non-emergency transportation program and DEVA developing informational materials related to eligibility for Medicaid non-emergency transportation. And then finally, section 30 is requiring the Secretary of Transportation in consultation with DEVA to convene a working group to improve coordination of healthcare and transportation services for individuals enrolled in the state's demand response transportation programs. So sort of a 5-pronged approach to some of the issues within the transportation.
And that's, obviously has to price stay up, so we can get up to speed on our end, so.
Yeah, I think there's really,
Yeah,
there really is, 2 pieces to this.
yeah,
The funding of the positions and the transport. And then it gets into, and we totally understand that there is conflict between the AOT, the public transit agencies, and DEVA and the Medicaid office. And to be quite frank, this has been going on, that second piece has been going on quite a long time. There's been language in the budget in the last 5 years, at least twice. There are 8 background checks that the public, people that volunteer their time for public transit have to get through. We understand there's federal requirements around that. but there's friction between the public transit agencies, AOT and DEVA on all of that. And so we understand that there's going to need to be work on this language. And we're at the best thing is if we could get people to the table to just understand each other's positions away from here and get through to we are I might say in the overall, in 2019, there were 300 people statewide that volunteered to do medical transports, and a lot of older people that need transport to doctor's appointment and stuff. COVID came and that dropped in half. And we're back up from 150 to 175. There's never been a statewide effort. And with the contraction of healthcare services statewide, and I'll just give you an example in the East Kingdom. The hospital in Newport is talking about eliminating dialysis. St. Johnsbury just went from 5 days a week for dialysis to 2. And they moved into nighttime. If you're in rural Vermont and you need to get to a doctor's appointment and the services are leaving your local provider, and clearly we had more people before COVID than now. So the attempt here is to do that, and the conflict in the area around helping provide information out, which DEVA will tell you they don't want to advertise, but they do have the factual information that the public transit agencies need to use to be able to put together a brochure. So it's not perfect. We're trying to address a problem that we see, and it does affect that 1.1 million earlier that came from the pilot.
Yeah. I don't have question on this too, but we have, want to go ahead.
What's your question?
Oh, the committee that was brought up that we were reviewing it yesterday is what happens next year. What's the intent for the money?
We are in the last year of the contract that DEVA has with the public transit agency. So everything here goes out for rebid. So we are in the last year of the contract. The other piece about this, and certainly we didn't have time to go through all this. If you have, for example, and I'll use the Northeast Kingdom again, transport is a covered expense through Medicaid. So if you have an area where 40% of your population is Medicaid, we can bill off to Medicaid to cover at least a portion of that cost. We in this are not in a position where we can tell you what the formula would look like. And so what we thought was, we get this started, we get it moving. If we could increase the number of volunteer drivers that are out there doing this work, we can work with DEVA, we can work with the public transit agencies and get to a place where we could possibly bill some of this cost off to Medicaid. But
If Medicaid is still.
well, if they are, but I expect a lot of the Medicaid cuts will more affect providers than these driving services, because these driving services are basic Medicaid, and our problem is going to be that we're going to lose the expansion population, which is going to affect our hospitals in that. This is an attempt to get ahead of those and try to do something in rural Vermont that would get people to doctors' appointments. So we don't expect you to say yes right off, but it is really in two pieces here. And that DEVA piece, we totally understand. And the background check. It's a problem and we don't know how to get people outside of in the world. How do we get those people to come together to have just a reasonable conversation together?
Yeah, we had a very robust public hearing in joint with our health and welfare committee. And I think this was our attempt to try to resolve it, but I don't think we've solved it. But that was our attempt.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, you know, I think when there's agreement, it's just sort of like out of our wheelhouse, you know, the FIFA and all that. So it's like I said, hopefully we can get to a place where parties can come together, but might take 60 seconds.
Yep. Okay.
All right, so, those are open. That brings us to section 31, ultra low volume vehicles. So yesterday we had discussed this section a little bit and discussed that B1, which is on the second page of that section, likely needs a language tweak to clarify that instead of examining the potential to waive some or all requirements, making it broader to examine how other states address motor vehicle emissions requirements for those, because it may include a mixture of waivers and other approaches to allow that. And then otherwise, that was what we discussed yesterday. So it's a Senate language. The House okay with it? Or
It's really to get it, that company in Milton that is really
Yeah, no.
pretty
remember
fancy
that-
little car.
It's been around for a little bit. Yeah, or this issue.
Yeah, kit car pieces and whatnot. There's somebody in like Harrisburg that does the same thing, or Virginia, Harrisburg area, et cetera. You know,
We tried to get it.
Apparently,
Apparently the company in Milton that has 6 employees now is making parts. It's moving. It's the first real car from scratch that was built in Vermont since the car in Bennington. That's in Bennington Museum, which was 1925.
Oh, gosh.
if we come up with a language change here that's being suggested for the waive versus more flexibility, then I'm pretty sure we're all good to go on.
Okay. If you've got, we'll look for your suggestion.
I think actually, council has provided us.
Oh, it's already did.
it's in there.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's just on the page before, that's the
Thank you.
confusing part. I really appreciate that language.
Yeah.
Try to help out when I can.
Perfect. So are we good to go with that then?
Okay. All right, section 32. This is the reversion to legislative review of renewals of leases and of regular leases for continued operation of state-owned railroad property. So
Just for the sake of time, we'll just say open.
Well,
So you can move it along.
Yes, that one's on hold.
all right, 33 and 34 are this is the updates to the dig safe language.
My understanding, this is in the big bill?
It was twice in the budget adjustment
Yeah.
passed by both bodies. Part of the reason for it's in here is we're trying to do this on passage because people are out there with those requests and people need to get busy on helping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Great. And the last one, legal trails.
Usually,
Yeah. All right.
All right, so that one will stay open. And that's it.
Okay. All right. You can update our documents.
I will update the document. At this point, what I can do, if it works for everybody, is I will say, for instance, where we've gone to the Senate version, I will say, agreed with Senate version. And instead of having the full language, and then where we've amended the language.
Little highlights with colors.
Yeah, where we've amended the language, I'll put in the amendment in here. I'm gonna hold off on creating a new document,
Okay.
or a committee report. Because there's just still so many sections, I don't wanna screw something up. Yep, and then I'll try to shorten this up. This is the David Hall approach here. To call out folks who are no longer with us at the legislature.
The legislature.
It worked great, so.
Yeah, so he just, you'll get a shorter and shorter side by side, but we're down to just a couple seconds hopefully. So, all right.
Okay,
Thank
Thank you very much.
Great.
next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, you two are the main.
When it is,
Well, we're meeting again at noon today.
are we meeting in the afternoon?
We're not, because Sarah Lyons isn't available.
So are you guys free to meet at 3:30 or?
We could, but I just don't know what will, because these outstanding issues.
Can we
are-
just-
Yeah, but we can meet, but it's just gonna.
Why don't we
take some
touch base?
Work on
I
our.
have something at 4:00. It's,
Is tomorrow in the morning.
So I have, no, I don't have LCAR tomorrow. I'm available in the morning. I can also do 3:30 to 4 today if you want to touch base.
Yeah,
That's
why don't we just touch base then and,
Okay.
and tomorrow morning, we're on at 8:30.
so I'll be here at 3:00.
So our mornings become, because
Yeah,
two of
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
But why don't we just